Dawn unstitched the sky thread by pale thread, until the long night over the red waste became a blown ember, a pale scab of light at the world's edge. The wind arrived before the sun, wind that sifted the high-baked dunes and combed the ashes where she had burned a cow. The air tasted of salt and old smoke. It smelled of horsehair singed to nothing and resin melted from wood into tears. When Daenerys rose from her pallet of rugs and woven grass, her hair was a tangle of ash and silk, her skin tight with heat and dryness, her lips split into the thinnest of smiles that hurt to shape but formed anyway. Something new lived in the world, and it lived with her. They made small sounds, soft as cloth being folded. Drogon slept across her chest like a warm page of night, the delicate hook of his claws pressing harmlessly at the linen that covered her breastbone. Rhaegal was a green coil near her hip, his breath a barely visible mist in the dawn chill, the bronze nails of his toes a line of stars. Viserion lay against her belly with his wings unfurled, a pale gold canopy of chitin and light that trembled at each exhalation. When she stirred, Drogon's head lifted, black and red, a bright sliver of tongue tasting the air, tasting her, tasting the day. He chirred and settled again. In that little sound she heard the hinge of 1,000 doors opening somewhere far away. Jiki put her head through the tent flap without a word, dark braid dusted gray. She knew now, as they all knew now, and no longer searched Daenerys with the anxious reverence of yesterday. Her eyes went first to the dragons, as all eyes did. "They are hungry, Khaleesi," Jiki said. She made the honorific a cradle for the new world. Daenerys smoothed a tangled wisp of Drogon's wing, smiled despite the ache in her mouth. "So am I." There was little to give them. Ago had taken 3 men out in the dark to hunt whatever might be hunted, but men returned to camp with bones more often than meat in the red waste. When Rakaro came to the tent later, the wind in his hair and his arak at his side, he carried a wrapped skin bundle that bled a little at one corner. "Sand hair," he said, proud as any father showing his newborn. "And a lizard with a useless head, Khaleesi. I snapped it like a twig. We will split it," Daenerys said. "The men, the women, the children." She set her palm lightly on Drogon's narrow skull, felt him press against it. "And my children will have their share." Jorah Mormont stood behind Rakaro, as he always stood a pace behind the men who still named her Khaleesi, only because they had no other shape for her. Sweat scalloped his brow and had dried there, leaving pale salt roads down his temples. His eyes were raw. He looked on the dragons the way a man stranded for months, on a gray sea, looks on the first color in the morning, the first scrap of sail, the first gull. When he looked at her, he tried to hold that same expression, but it changed. With Jorah, it always changed. "They won't live on rabbit and lizard forever," he said once Rakaro had gone. "They need more than scraps. And you need more." His voice was careful, as though he were carrying a jar full of boiling oil from one side of the tent to the other. Daenerys lifted Drogon away from her collarbone and offered him to the strip of sun that was beginning to slip under the tent flap. He opened his mouth wide as if laughing and made a sound that was not a cry, not yet. The sound of a string being plucked with a sharp fingernail. "We will find a city," she said. "We will find ships and food and armor and men. There are walls I have not seen. There are gates that open. There are gates that close," Jorah said. But he smiled, so that she did not have to choose anger. She kept no count of the hours rising from that ash-scented dawn, only the small body weights shifting across her, the burns on her hands that no longer hurt, the way the dragons took the slivers of meat and snapped them away and licked their teeth afterward as if tasting the future. The kalisar moved again, a smeared ribbon of people and animals along the ridge of a world that did not change. Those who could not walk were tied to litters, ropes groaning, and those who had the strength shouldered poles and felt their shoulders splinter slowly over days. There were songs even so, thin songs that did not dare call rain. Songs of mothers telling stories to children who were already older than their years and older than the land. It was better to sing than to swallow dust. Daenerys rode the silver where the path was firm and walked her beside the worst dunes to spare the mare's legs. The wind pulled at her hair. She wore no crown. She did not need one. There were eyes on her, and some were crowns, and some were knives. In her tent at night she would unbind her hair and shake the ash from it, and Eerie would rub perfumed oil into her scalp with careful, trembling fingers, as if at any moment a bird might burst from Daenerys' skull. Sometimes it felt that way to her too. That first night, when the camp had arranged itself into tired circles, and the fire pits were lit with the last scraps of thorn and brush, Daenerys went down to the place where they had burned the world and found a new one. She did not wake Rakaro or Ago. She did not tell Jorah. She took a skin of water and a knife and went alone. Her shadow long and thin against the salt hard pan, a shard of glass under a risen moon. The ashes remembered her feet. There was nothing there for her, except everything. The pyre had collapsed inward into a black basin, and under the wind's hand it had become a shallow bowl of ash and bone fragments and charred iron. It still held heat in its deepest part, a quiet, husbanded heat like breath under blankets. Daenerys crouched and left the skin by her ankle, and put her hand into the ash until the ash burned her, and put it deeper still. The pain was clean and full of purpose. The pain reminded her she was not done. The first time she drew back her fingers, the ash had changed them gray and left no mark. The second time she pressed all the way down until the grit caught in her ring and the ash poured into her sleeves, and then something hard and smooth touched her palm. It was no larger than a man's closed fist, and so hot that she had to close her hand at once around it, or drop it and lose it forever. For a moment, she thought she had found only a stone, some unburned piece of Drogo's pyre, a remnant of bone polished by flame. She did not know why her heart kicked against her ribs as if it were trying to flee her. She did not know why she laughed a breathless little girl's laugh that was not hers anymore. She took it out into light. It was black. Black, the way a night sea is black, when thunderheads lean down to kiss a shore. A black that wanted to be a color and never quite was. Across it, a fine network of gray lines spidered. Not the jagged lightning of her 3 eggs, not the fat oozing fissures of stone softened by heat, but hairline cracks so faint she had to turn the thing to see them. And even then, she could have talked herself into believing they were only the memory of veins beneath skin. When she set her thumb to one, she felt nothing beneath it, as you feel the pulse of life beneath a vein. It was cool now in the wind, and yet when she set it against her bare forearm, the flesh knew what the eye did not. There was warmth inside, stored, hoarded, clutched in a deep that had no name. Daenerys held it with both hands and looked toward the sleeping circles of her people and did not move. It would be a simple thing to walk back with empty hands. It would be a simple thing to set this back down in the ash and kick dust over it until it disappeared the way old troubles disappeared. Under a little labor and time, only to reappear with the first hard rain. She closed her eyes and saw not the ash bowl and not the unchanging dunes. She saw a hall of red stone where a man with silver hair sang to a child. She saw light on a blade. She saw the door to a room that had never been locked in the palace of a fat man, and the cloth-wrapped weight that had been placed in her arms like a reminder of what inheritance meant. 3 eggs, Illyrio had said, and the breath in his beard had smelled of honey and sour wine. 3, as in 3. But the world was not a ledger. The world was ash and wind, and the rules burned. She hid it. Not even in her tent at first, for her tent had eyes. She found a shallow in the earth under a thorn bush with a spine like a queen's spear, and scraped away the salt crust with a flat stone, and wrapped the black thing in a scrap of old saddle blanket. She left it there among the roots. The bush had drawn water once. It would teach the wrapped thing to draw it too. She walked back slow, as if speed might pull a rope that came out of the ground and gave her away. The second day was worse for thirst. The children showed her their teeth, so she could see how their gums had gone pale where they did not bleed. Men drank their water in the morning and then pretended the skins were still heavy all day and had to drink nothing. Some of them died at night with their hands on those skins, as if a prayer could make water out of time. The dragons took their bits of lizard and hair and flicked their tongues to taste the moisture on the inside of her wrist, where she turned the spout of the water skin for them and made herself look away when the water that had not been spilled on their tongues spotted the dust. In the evening she went back to the thorn bush, and found the place by the roots by memory alone, and lifted the blanket, and found the black thing unchanged. But its weight in her hands felt different. She thought of Drogo's long hair catching fire like a pennon. She thought of a horse rearing against a halter, and not lunging until the rope burned through it. She did not think of 3. She was done counting. On the 3rd night, the wind did not come. The air lay down as a man lies down for the last time. And the heat stayed where it was born, and the tent smelled of old spit and leather and brine, and the fat that melted from the last goat they would have for a while. Irri fell asleep against the tent pole, her hands still faintly oily from the perfume she had smoothed into Daenerys' scalp, a sweet floral thing that had gone sour in this air. The 3 dragons arranged themselves across Daenerys like jewels, arranged to show a prince's wealth. But she was alone with them in a way she had never been alone, even when Viserys stood across the room and did nothing but breathe and want. Alone because something in the world was in a place she had made in it, and no one else knew. She slipped from beneath Drogon's wing as a woman slips from beneath her own thoughts. She went without water and without lamp, a shadow with hair that snared the stars. The thorn bush was a jagged crown in the earth. She knelt and set her hand to ground, and felt how the heat of the day still lived in the salt crust, the way bread holds the oven, and when she pulled at the old blanket, she could see where the salt had crept into its weave and left white on brown. The black weight was a little warmer than the earth. She held it to her cheek and smiled, and then did not smile, and then smiled again, as though the face could not agree with the heart about what had been found. It was on the 7th night that it woke. She did not know then that 7 would be a number the priests cared about, or that there were men in cities she had not yet seen who would count her breaths and read them like cracks in old stone. But had she known, she would not have cared. She had taken to bringing a handful of coals from the fire pit down to the thorn bush in a dented iron bowl. Coals raked smooth by Jiki's stick. Coals that glowed as if ashamed to be seen. She set the black thing near them and crouched and watched until her knees complained and ignored the complaint, the way a queen ignores a petition that comes from a man she already knows she will never forgive. The coals gave off their thin breath, and the wind took it and laid it on her skin, and she rubbed a little ash between thumb and forefinger, and thought how everything in the world seemed to be made of things rubbed smaller. She did not at first understand that the low sound she heard was not the ash talking to the wind. She thought it was her own body speaking to her in the way the old woman in Vase Dothrek said women's bodies spoke, in dreams, in water, in blood. But then she set her ear to the iron bowl and heard how the sound vibrated the metal, a faint clamor beyond any she could name. She put her hand on the black thing, and the cracks, if they were cracks, seemed to hum beneath her palm. There was a moment like the moment after a blade leaves its sheath and before it strikes. When it happened, it was small, a line of gray widened hair by hair. The skin of the black thing parted with an old man's sigh. The first air that came out smelled of something like stone ground under heel, and something like old coins, and something like rain that had never fallen. She did not breathe except for breathing. She thought, absurdly, of the first time she had touched snow on the mountain, the way it had powdered and vanished at once and left her fingers wet and cold. The shell curled back. A slit became a mouth became a circle. Eyes opened and had no whites to them, only 2 round pits of polished obsidian with a thin ring of violet far in the back. The tiny creature that slid out did not cry. It trembled once, as if the air were very rude to greet it so abruptly, and shook off a skin of scalloped black that clung to it in a delicate lace. It was not like Drogon, though it was black as he was black. Its blackness had weight to it, a way of eating the light that touched it, so that where its body cast a shadow, the shadow looked fat. Its wings were a finer web than Drogon's, and were etched not red, but a deep wine color that showed only when the fire caught the edges. It had a row of small spines down its spine, but they were shorter and closer together than the other's spines. And when it lay against her palm, they flattened so completely that her skin felt them only as a faint roughness, like the grain in old wood. Daenerys bit her lip until the split there opened. A drop of blood welled, round as a red seed, and she smeared it along the little thing's jaw. Its tongue flickered and took the blood, and withdrew into the mouth, and then came out once more, tasting. The coals glowed and splintered. One collapsed into itself with a whisper. Around them the waste was a bowl turned upside down over the world, a sky that knew her by name and had nothing to give. Daenerys bent her face and said something in a language she did not know she knew. It was a sharp-edged set of sounds, and the little creature made no noise in answer, but its eyes narrowed and widened, as if a thought moved across them. She did not say Dracarys. That would come later, when mouths were big enough to hold the word, and fire was something she could afford to use without apology. She said a different thing, a soft thing. It was not a command, but a vow. She did not bring this one back to the tent. She took the coals back to the fire pit and said nothing of what she had seen to the men who were knitting up a net from horsehair, hoping to catch wind. She returned to the thorn bush and lifted the little creature with both hands. It lay against her left wrist, a narrow weight, the membrane of its wing warm against her skin. When she moved, it flattened there and clung, claws folded delicately. It was small enough to hide beneath the wide fall of her sleeve. Smaller than Drogon had been when he split the world. Slight as a child's flute, she breathed slow and let her hair come forward as a curtain, and walked as a mother walks when she carries a sleeping infant out of a room full of men playing at knives. Her tent was empty, save for Irri, who slept again where she had slept before, her mouth open a little, a thread of drool still glistening at her lip. The three other dragons shifted and resettled at Daenerys' approach, and Drogon opened one eye to watch the thing beneath her sleeve, with a cool interest that was not quite curiosity. She kept her arm very still, and turned her body so that her women would not see, even if they woke. She set a brazier in the corner, and took a coal with a pair of tongs, and put it in the brazier, and set a little dried dung over it, and watched until it caught with a faint sweet stink. She turned her back again, and slipped the small black presence from her arm, and into the thin darkness beneath the brazier, where the heat rose and could be lived on. It did not move again. She did not sleep. She lay on her side and felt the heat from the brazier on her knees, and the cooler air on her back, and watched where the silk of the tent wall barely stirred. When she closed her eyes, all four of them were there behind her lids, not born from a pyre all at once but present, as if they had always been. The three were a triangle of brightness and sound. The fourth was a blot that explained darkness. She did not fear it. She feared what her fear would make of it, so she loved it instead. In the morning she told Jorah a lie that did not feel like a lie until it had left her mouth. "We have less dung for the braziers," she said as she watched him tie a knot in a cord, with hands that had forgotten what softness was. "Use the little one in the corner sparingly. I will keep it for myself." "Of course," Jorah said. "Keep it for yourself." They walked. They walked until Irri's sandals fell apart, and Rakaro cut the laces from his own, and gave them to her, and stitched hers again. They walked until Aggo said nothing for a day, and only on the second day said he had seen the shape of palms like a troop of green soldiers far to the south, and was not sure whether he had dreamed them. They walked until three children slept and did not wake, and Daenerys had to stand and look at their mother's anger and say nothing to it, because she had nothing that could answer it without breaking apart. It was Jiki who adorned their little bodies with bits of colored leather and beads, and set them out for the night to see, as if the stars could adopt them and make something else of them. Daenerys did not cry. She had cried at the pyre until there were no tears left, and when fortune offered her some to use on these children, she refused. At night, the dragons learned. They learned the shape of her whistle, the precise press of her finger against the woven reed that made a sound like a bird. Drogon learned quickest, and with the cleanest lines. His mind came to things as a knife goes to its sheath, smoothly, as if it had been made for the one motion. Rhaegal had a way of thinking that involved circles. Viserion came to her like water around stone, and would always find the way. The fourth learned as shadows learn, by being there when no one thought of them, and thus being the truest thing. She called to it with a breath more than a sound, and it moved from the brazier to her palm and back again, in the small hours when even the sand held its breath. Its little flame, when it licked out in its sleep like a dog's tongue does when a dog dreams, was not red. The coals blued when it touched them. The smoke from that brazier smelled different, sweeter, with an undertone like the iron in blood. On the 12th day the palms were real and had water under them. Men fell to their knees and scooped brown handfuls of life out of a shallow pool, and some of them drank so fast they sickened themselves and lay where they were, and thought it had been worth it to be hurt by joy. Daenerys went last, and took the water in her hands as if it were a face she had not seen in years, and pressed it to her cheeks, and to her temples. She let Irri wash her hair with it, and did not think of the women who had watched their children die of thirst. She allowed the dragons to drink from her cupped palms, each in turn, so they would know the vessel that bore them would always be the first spring. The fourth did not drink then. Later that night, when all was quieter and the dunes around the oasis hunched like tired men, it slid from under the brazier with its soundless grace, and set the tip of its tongue to the water trapped in the crease of her knee. She laughed without noise and tapped its head lightly in reproach, and gave it 2 drops from her fingertip. It flickered its long eyes at her, and tasted the ring she wore, a small circle of old gold, with a flaw in it, the shape of an eyelash. There were men who brought stories with the water. Caravans came small and careful, and passed along the far ridge, a thread that did not wish to be tugged. One sent an envoy to stand and talk from 30 paces, so that no one's shadow would touch another man's heart. They spoke of Qarth the way a priest speaks of his own god, not as something you could argue with, but as a thing that had arranged the world and now had no need of argument. Walls that had 33 kinds of stone set into them. Gates that had names. A harbor that fed on spice and silk. The pure-born who did not have to prove the name. A king of merchants who needed nothing and desired everything. Zaro, said the envoy, rolling the syllables as if they were pearls in his mouth. Pyat Pri, he added then, with a needle to the pearls. Daenerys took each name and set it on a shelf inside herself. A shelf for knives, a shelf for light, a shelf for rope. When the decision was made in her chest, it moved to her throat, and she told Jorah, "We will go to Qarth. You will talk to me of its walls on the way, so that the walls will not be so surprised to see me. Menso, you will need more than talk to go through them," Jorah said. "I will have more than talk." She did not tell him then that she had more than even he had imagined. She touched the brazier in the corner with the side of her foot, and the little thing inside it turned in sleep, and lay the other cheek to the coals. They went east, then south, then east again, the way a man goes toward a home he has never seen but has made a map of in the dark. The dunes grew less arrogant. The sand changed its grip. They found brush, and then scrub, and then the suggestion of lines on the land, old irrigation ditches that had silted up and forgotten themselves, and now remembered a little. Everything was a message if you had a place to put it in your head. The dragon's wings strengthened. Drogon would climb her shoulder when the wind came right and leap into it, and ride as far as the next clump of brush, then circle back and land with an indignation he could not disguise, as if the air had cheated him and made the world too big. Viserion learned to hover over a puddle of ants and drop onto it, and snap 3 at a time from the air like seeds. Rhaegal liked heights, and would climb the tent pole at night to watch men piss and laugh small dragon laughs that sounded like brittle leaves cracking. The fourth learned something different. It learned where the spaces were. If there were 3 men around a fire, there was a place between their backs that did not belong to any of them. It could put itself there and live a whole hour unremarked. If there was a wagon with a cracked plank, there was a sliver between 2 shadows inside it that had been made by accident, and in that sliver it was a thread, and in that thread it was the world. She named it then, at last, because a thing without a name has no way to come when called. She stroked its head in the brazier glow, and said the words softly, so the canvas would not hear it and carry it to anyone else. "Ac Yaris," she said, tasting it. It was not High Valyrian she had learned, and it was not the gutter Valyrian of crowded markets. It was a name that came the way some winds come, from directions names don't point to. When she said it, the dragon's eyes altered, as if her breath had passed across the surface of the glass in them, and left a mark that would only be visible when frost came. Sekizares flexed one wing, and then the other, and set his head back down among the coals, as a cat does, among yarn. She told no one. She told not Eri nor Jikwi, who would have worshipped a secret and therefore wrecked it. She told not Rakaro, who would have seen in it a gift that a Khal must show his strength with. She told not Jorah, who would have made of it a plan, and of her a ledger entry. She told the desert, because the desert forgets. Qarth found them at last, when they had barely enough will to find it. The land made a low bowl again, but this one had green at its center, and a city set like a jewel on a palm. The walls rose like someone's dream of walls, blue and white and pale yellow, and so smooth that the light ran across them the way light runs across water, and you cannot tell where the light ends and the water begins. The caravans that went in and out did so under carved creatures that watched with their stone eyes. A gate had a face. A gate had breasts. A gate had a mouth that could have taken a man in. The kalisar bunched and unbunched, uncertain, like cattle at the edge of a stream that smells of crocodiles. A delegation came out. Men whose clothes exchanged heat for grace. Women with hair like poured ink and skin that had never begged. The one who spoke stood under a blue sun standard, as if the sun were an umbrella, and he its handle. He named himself Xaro Xhoan Daxos, as if he were telling the land where to look for him. He named himself Friend. His teeth were large and welcoming. His eyes were counting things, and not all of them were hers. He saw the dragons, and an extra word slid into his mouth, and was swallowed before it reached the air. Daenerys smiled, as if her lips were not split and had not bled. She smiled as if this were a feast, and there were 5 knives at each place setting, and she had chosen the one that would cut best. "Your city is beautiful," she said. "My children have never seen a place such as this." "Then your children are lucky, and so is the city," Xaro said. "It will be improved by their gaze." He stepped nearer. "You will come under my roof. You will bathe. You will have silk if silk is your desire, and stone if you prefer honest things." He took in the 3 dragons without letting his eyes appear to take, which is a talent some men are born with and others buy. "And honest men," Daenerys said. "Stone that can speak." He laughed. "Even that could be arranged, though the price of honest men has never been dearer." They went under the blue sun, with the smell of foreign water in their noses. The porters who carried her litter used a gait that did not offend the bones. The streets had shade when shade was needed, and then forgot it in favor of sun when the breeze asked for it. The house Xaro gave her had a balcony that looked over a garden, arranged to be looked at from exactly that height, so that the trees were not trees, but shapes, and the shapes had voices, and the voices argued and made peace, and argued again. There was a bath and water for it, and thin white steam that had not had to be begged for. Her women wept, and did not hide it, when the scented water ran down their breasts and bellies, and took away a layer of the waste they had not known was there. Daenerys let them weep, and did not. She lowered herself into the bath as a queen lowers an army into a valley, with both hands and with a mind to what might be hiding there. She set the 3 dragons in the tiled warmth where they perched on the lip with startled dignity, and lapped the bath water with little indignant noises. Sakazares remained in the brazier. The brazier was copper, hammered and engraved with vines full of fat fruit. The coals were not dung now, but proper charcoal, sharp and exact, and ready to hold a shape. She positioned it so that the light from the garden would not fall into it directly, and she fed it as if it were a lover in a sickbed, often and with small portions, and spoke his name only when the steam hiss was loud enough to devour the sound. She told the brazier a story to tell the little dragon, a story of an egg under a thorn bush, and the thorn bush was a crown, and crowns are for wearing and also for bleeding. Xaro's house had 100 little places where a thought could be folded and set aside. She made use of them. There was a cupboard whose back panel slid left if you pressed one corner with a thumb, and behind it a narrow press full of old clothes that smelled of pepper and cedar and half-remembered women. She put there a small dish of water for Sakazares when the nights were hottest, and a strip of paper she had torn from a merchant's letter, and on it she had written, in a hand so small it embarrassed the script, the letters of his name. She did not need to see them to know them. She needed to put them somewhere the house could learn them. Men came to Xaro's house. Some of them said they had not come later. They sat on cushions and chewed sugared fruit, and spoke of sea lanes as if sailors were beads on a string, and they could move them at will. Pyat Pri came too, though he did not chew fruit, and sat so lightly, it seemed that he suspected the cushions would draw him down and drink him if he sank too deep. His eyes were the blue of faded paint on old plaster, his skin the color of a man who has not had what skins need. He looked not at her face but at a point over her right shoulder, and slightly above her head. Perhaps in his mind he already saw a crown there, and could not take his eyes away, in case someone stole it when he looked down to drink. "You have power, Daenerys Stormborn," he said, the last word a hiss on his tongue, the way men with small mouths say words that require more. "I have children," she said. "Power must wait its turn. In the house of the Undying we make room," Pyat Pri said. "We have corridors for the turns power takes. We have a room for every name spoken by any child in any age. We have a room for you." He smiled, and his teeth made a mood in the air that did not belong to smiles. It is the custom to bring a gift to the house when one attends upon it. Should a guest bring her own food to a banquet? Xaro asked with false lightness, waving one hand as if scattering the words like rose petals. "The house provides a feast of sorts," the warlock said. "But gifts are the custom." His eyes slid to the dragons and back to her brow with such quickness that a lesser woman could have thought she had imagined it. Daenerys lifted her cup and let the sugared wine touch her split lip. "I am a guest of Qarth," she said. "Qarth has many customs. I am only a woman hoping not to behave ill in a city of so much grace." She went to the house of the Undying, only in her dreams that week. In the dreams the corridors did not end, and the rooms had walls of silk that breathed, and she collected bits of thread from the silk and braided them into rope. And the rope led her outside, and when she turned to see what she had escaped from, there was no house there at all, only a garden, and the garden was in the room with her. Sometimes she woke with the taste of smoke in her mouth, and the certain knowledge that she had said a name aloud that she never said when she was awake. Irri told her once, she murmured. "What name?" Daenerys asked. "You were speaking in a language I don't know," Irri said. That was an answer. Sekizares grew faster than seemed just. He was small still, but his smallness changed shape. It was no longer the helpless smallness of a thing that could be broken by an idea. It was the sharpened smallness of a needle. His wings had learned the rooms. He could move from shadow to shadow without touching the bright. Once she found him on the balcony at midday, flattened along the strip of shade cast by the railing, like a spilled shadow that had decided to climb things. She scolded him soft and put him back into his brazier, and stroked the clean, almost invisible roughness of his spine. He made a noise she had not heard before, not a cry and not contentment, something like the sharpening of a blade on leather. The coals popped. One spat a spark that landed on her wrist and burned a neat black point into her skin. She did not move away. The three played in the garden when Xaro's servants brought water to spray from copper mouths hidden among the leaves. Viserion chased the droplets as if they were flies made of light. Rhaegal tried to climb the cypress that had been pruned into the shape of a hand, making a promise. Drogon sprawled in a patch of sun as if he had made it and it owed him gratitude. Men watched from the colonnade beyond, some with soft eyes and some with eyes that weighed. Daenerys watched too, but from within. She lived two lives now. In one she stood among cushions and spoke of ships and grain and the price of salt and the way the sea of summer had storms no one could predict. In the other, she measured coals and told a secret how large to become. "Trust me," Xaro said in his cool way one afternoon, as if the words were a formal garment he put on when the heat demanded clothing. "The pure-born will do nothing at all without gold, and afterward will only do a thing they have already done in their minds. You must help them imagine." His hands moved when he spoke, long-fingered, too long, as if a man had stolen a bird's hands and learned to use them. "I will." She said, and thought of how she had placed her little dragon in a space behind a cupboard no one used. All the imagining in the world counted for less than a place that fit a thing exactly. Jorah had grown quieter since Qarth took them in. He kept his sword nearer, and his questions nearer still. He asked her twice in one day whether she was in danger. as if the number of times he asked could change the answer. The second time she had just shaped Sekizares to the inside of her sleeve where the wind could not ground him. And she was still warm from the fear and triumph of going among men with her fourth child hidden against her skin. And she could not keep the smile from shifting the corners of her mouth. "Danger," she said. "There are men in the next street who feed small birds to a snake for amusement. There is a woman under the cedar who has not looked up in 3 hours because she has decided she will not if a man is watching. There is a boy who carries a tray as if it were an altar, and a man who thinks the tray holds some part of him. Danger is a cloth they use here. It is very soft and very expensive." "Do not be clever with me," he muttered, but it pleased him to be answered with something other than dread. He stepped closer, as if to cast his shadow over her because he did not know how else to keep the sun off her. His gaze faltered toward her sleeve and fled. "If you go to the house." "If?" She made a small thing of the word. "When?" he corrected, resigned. He had always known the shape of her stubbornness. "When you go, do not go alone. Do not drink. Do not eat. If they give you any gift, set it down where they can see you. Set it down. I will take what is offered and return what is asked of me," she said. And if her hand slipped a moment to touch the tender place at her wrist where Sekizares' claws lay, that was only an accident, an itch. Yora's eyes found the movement and pretended not to. She began to train Sekizares to lace himself into her clothes. She took an old sash and stitched tiny loops along its inside with a needle that Iri kept for mending underclothes. She threaded a thin leather thong through them and tied it in a way that could be undone with a fingernail. When she lifted the sash and held it above the brazier, the little dragon looked up, and then down, and then up again, and then stepped onto it as if onto the branch of a dark tree. There was trust there, the kind that is both a luxury and an economy. She wrapped the sash around her waist under her dress so that his heat was against her, so that when she walked through Zaro's long cool hall with the columns like white tusks, she carried a word she had not spoken and a blade no one had seen. He did not like the light, and he did not like the crowd. In a room full of men he almost vanished, not in shape but in presence. He became the part of a room your mind decides not to attend to. When she brought him near Drogon, the two stared at one another too long, and Viserion churred and broke it. When she brought him near Rhaegal, he flattened himself, and then made himself larger again, and then folded his wings so compactly that his body looked wrong, and Rhaegal was bored and turned his face to a blue porcelain vase painted with white cranes. Viserion touched Sekizares on the ridge of his back with the tip of his nose, and the little one turned his head and breathed out a thread of cool flame that left a white mark on the blue of the brazier for a moment, and then it faded. Daenerys laughed and stopped laughing at once when Yr's head lifted. "What?" Iri said, sleepy. "A thought came to me," Daenerys said, and Iri lowered her head again and smiled to herself, as if she had overheard a dream and chosen not to hold it. On the 4th morning in Qarth, she woke with a certain knowledge that someone had tried to come into her room in the night and had been turned aside, not by the bolt she had set on the door, but by some other kind of threshold. She could not say how she knew it. The silk at the door's edge lay almost imperceptibly differently. That was all. The water in the copper bowl had a taste as if a finger had been dipped in it and withdrawn. She rose without waking her women and went to the balcony and found a single blue petal there that had not been there the night before and had no business to be there now, as the garden below had no such flower. She took the petal between finger and thumb and crushed it, and the smell was salt-sweet and sharp like new paint. She held it out, and Sekizares slid from the brazier up her arm and set his tongue to it, and tasted and withdrew. The line of his eye thinned. She let the petal fall. She spoke his name. She did not say what she wanted him to do. They neither of them could have borne to have her ask. He slid back into the brazier and disappeared among the coals as if he had never been. Zaro presented her with a necklace that afternoon, a chain of discs thin as a fingernail, each the size of a coin, hammered so fine that the light that touched one side came out the other. It lay on her collarbones like the cool certainty of a blade that knows how to rest. "Wear this when you go out," he said, "and every man who looks at you will know he is poor. I did not bring the world to Qarth to be told that." She said. But there was no harm in letting a gift choose what story it wanted to tell about itself. She wore it later to the gardens where the pureborn walked in pairs, like gossip looking at itself in a mirror. And Pyat Pri was there, which was an accident that had been invited, and he made a small show of ignoring the dragons, as if to convince himself he was not in danger of wanting them. "Your city is a clever book," Daenerys said to him without smiling. "Every man I meet here believes he is the author." "Books are made to be written in," Pyat Pri said. "Come to the house. We have ink no one else has." There were nights when she dreamed not of the house, but of a coast. Der morsal cape salder tir. Of a stone keep the wind could not break, and a room with windows narrow, as the slits in a careful man's eyes, and boys playing at swords with sticks. A wolf's head was carved above a hearth. The stone smelled of rain and iron and men. The dream left her with the sense that fate was a geography lesson taught to a child who had not asked for it, but would be tested later. She would wake and turn her head to the brazier and see Sekazaris's eyes there, twin polished moons that did not throw back the light so much as hold it for later. "Not yet," she said to him once, out loud. And his lids dropped halfway and rose again. She touched her lip and tasted iron. "Not yet," she said again, to the house, to the sea, to the boys with sticks, to the gates with the mouths. She did not keep the secret for the pleasure of it. She did not hoard to hoard. She did it because she had been a girl in a house full of men whose pockets were full of her. And she had learned that sometimes the only justice in the world is what you hide from it. She did it because her brother had given away everything that was hers for the smell of a crown and the shape of a throne in a window. And she had seen how men stepped lightly around a thing a woman kept to herself, and how their eyes slid off it as though their gaze had decided to be obedient to her for once. She did it because she could. She did it because the feeling of Sekazari's small weight against her inner arm as she walked into a room full of men was a sacrament, a straightening of the spine that no coronation could equal. Sometimes she thought of the thorn bush. Izaro's garden had a shrub from Ashai with long, drooping branches and flowers like stars that had fallen into the branches and scorched a little of them, but were comfortable there. She went to it at dusk and touched the underside of one of its leaves, and felt the faint roughness there where the leaf protected itself from the sun's spite. She whispered into the leaf what she had not whispered to anyone: how a piece of the world had opened in her palm and asked to be allowed, and how she had consented. The leaf did not tell. The leaf, like the desert, had been taught to be discreet by long acquaintance with wind. There was an evening when Zaro called her to the roof to see a troupe of singers and dancers perform the old Qarthine story of the Mother of Cities. He had placed cushions and bowls of figs dusted with sugar and a jug of wine with frost sweating on the jug's fat belly, as though the wine were ashamed of itself. The dancers wore garments that denied their bodies while suggesting them. It was a talent. It was a way of making hunger a religion. The story was lavish and full of forgiveness. Men like Zaro prefer stories that forgive them. Daenerys watched with her face arranged into courtesy and thought of burning on a plain and being new. Sekazaris dozed against her ribs, a ribbon of heat that kept her center true. When the dance had passed the place in the story where the Mother of Cities had sent her sons into the wilderness to find new land, and they had become lost and been saved by a woman who taught them a different way to eat figs, Pyat Pri came near like a wasp that has decided the meat belongs to him and the picnic will end when he allows it. "Tomorrow," he said, very soft, as if the word were a dust he meant to blow into her eyes. "The house has rooms that will be empty if you do not fill them. Then leave them empty," she said. "Rooms abhor emptiness," he said, and for a moment, something like feeling crept along the bones of his face and made them rougher. "We abhor it," He looked at her belly, and at the thin place between her breasts, where the necklace lay flat, and too cool, and therefore told on itself, and his eyes narrowed a fraction. "Bring them, bring the 3. We will give them back the way a well gives back to the bucket. I have more than 3, she almost said. She set her tongue to her split lip and swallowed the sentence before it could grow teeth. She lifted her cup. "Do not mistake me for a woman who does not understand thirst." Sorrow laughed as if she had made a wit of him. Men around her took their cue from his laughter and made of it a chorus. The night, which belonged to the roof, gave back its own laughter, the little fountains in the garden below shaking their shoulders and allowing. Sekazaris turned his head so that his narrow eyes slid to look down at her hand where the cup met it, and then up again, as if to say, "This is not enough now, but it is enough tonight." Daenerys went to bed late. Her women lay limp as abandoned dresses on their pallets. She went to the brazier and lifted the tongs and moved the coals one by one, as she always did, making a space for his breath. He came at once. A slick of black poured from a small jug, and set his jaw in the place she had made, and took 3 careful breaths. She stroked him with one finger along his jaw. "Tomorrow," she said, because it had become the only word men wanted to talk about. Because in Qarth tomorrow was a coin missing from the purse you were going to show a man. "Tomorrow I will go where men want me to go. Tomorrow I will bring what they want me to bring. Tomorrow I will let rooms that have been empty be full." "Them?" Sekazaris lifted his head and placed the point of his nose against her chin in a way that was too precise to be accident. She closed her eyes and rested her chin there as if she had always had that support and had merely forgotten. She tried to imagine the house of the Undying as a place with a door and a window. She tried to imagine it as a place like any other, with men in it who could be pleased or angered or deceived. She thought of the black basin of ash and of a thorn bush with a crown on it. She had buried a thing once in the waste. She could bury other things. Not yet. She whispered once more into the little roof of dragon and flame that was the brazier. The word did not taste of fear. It tasted of something that would stand in a courtyard and not move when men shouted at it. She lay down behind the scent of warm metal and charcoal, and let the steam of her breath lift and disappear into the silk, and let the secret heat at her core bank down to something a coal might understand. In the expected morning, she woke before the expected sun. There is a breath the city takes before the first bell, an inhalation of ovens being opened and shutters being unbarred, and men trying to decide what face to put on, and women deciding who will see which of theirs. She sat up and set her feet to the carpet and looked at her hands, which were small and brown and scarled in hers. Eerie stirred and reached for the pitcher, and Jikwi opened one eye and smiled and said nothing. The dragons uncoiled from their sleeping shapes and greeted the air like lords. Sekazaris made no sound at all, but she felt him slide a thought across her like a sash being tied. A thought of coal and shadow, and the exact weight of a name. The city would ask for her today the way a beggar asks, insistently, sweetly, with practiced humility. The house would open a mouth at her and let her see teeth and tongue. The men who pervade rooms would hold out their hands as if they were offering her a drink, and then watch with astonishment when she took the cup and did not spill. She dressed slowly. The necklace lay cool again against her collarbones and did not lie. It announced itself without her help. She let Eerie tie the sash tight with a little more force than usual, because Eerie had a streak in her that needed to accomplish something in the mornings. The loops she had stitched along its inner face accepted the leather thong with a slight complaint. Like lips that had been kissed too often too early. Sekazaris took his place without coaxing, snug and ready as if he had been born to be the secret of a woman. He had been. He was. Drogon went to her shoulder and the other two arranged themselves along her arms in a way that made men who loved stories stop and think how this looked in their minds. The young queen, the 3 living emblems of a world that had ended and begun. There are moments when men become ink, and she gave them this. She gave them this, and kept one thing for herself. It felt like justice. It felt like war. Outside, Qarth rehearsed its astonishments. The air shook a little under the bells harnessed high above the streets. Perfume clung low to the ground like a charm laid for clumsy men. The gate, the house of the Undying owned, or the gate that owned the house, waited where it had always waited, indifferent to procession and desperate for it. Daenerys walked with her dragons, and with her women, and with the man who had decided to love her, because he had not yet learned how not to love the things he could not control. The crowd opened and closed around her like cloth being cut and mended. Xaro's servants went before and after as if they had brought her here themselves, and could return her the same way if they were given a different instruction. Pyat was there at the stairs like a blue flame that had run out of wood and had learned to live on air. He bowed. He offered his mouth. The day lifted its first real heat and laid it along her neck. Sekazaris adjusted himself once, a small necessary movement, and then was still. The house raised its eyes, if it had eyes, and looked at the little company and at the little queen and at the small bright things she had put on her arms that called themselves dragons. It wondered perhaps if it had counted correctly. Daenerys smiled, and the shapes she had trained into her face arranged themselves for war and for pleasure and for grief and for triumph in the exact proportions she wanted. She set her foot on the first step and did not think of the second. The second would come if the first were true. The city watched and made itself a story about this. In the shade of her sleeve, a thin heat coiled and waited. She could have told all their secrets then, because she had something in her that required none of theirs. Instead, she descended into the house of the Undying as she had risen from the ashes on that first dawn. With her eyes open and her hands empty and her heart full of coals she had counted and refused to count, naming them to herself one by one and not saying a single one aloud.